It's probably good that I didn't press the record before I told that story too. Okay, here we are, session 7. Uh, the the great cloud of witnesses. But before we move on to speaking about the saints and understanding, um, the the benefits, the profound benefits that we receive from their witness that they give to us in the life of the church. I want to go back and touch on bereavement just a bit more. Grieving is such a profound thing. It's such a um, uh, a life-changing thing when we lose loved ones. And and I think last time we touched on a few things, but there's so much more that could be said. Um, and I want to share just a couple of thoughts from C.S. Lewis. I think only people who have actually experienced the loss of a spouse, or the loss of a child, or loss of a dear and a close friend, can really understand what others who have had the same loss are going through. And the rest of us, we can try to appreciate or understand it, but we don't really go through the same things as, we might say, Ethan and Gretchen are going through right now in the loss of their son Adam, or Jordan or Rachel are going through at the loss of their brother, or Lindsay is going through at the loss of her husband. And yet C.S. Lewis wrote a book just weeks after the loss of his wife. And one of the reasons I think that book has resonated so powerfully with people is because he was just in the midst of that grief. And I think if you listen to some of the things that he says, it sensitizes us and helps us to appreciate more fully what life is like when that first tsunami comes in and turns the life every of those who loved that person upside down. So let me just share a few quotes from C.S. Lewis's book, A Grief Observed, and we'll talk about them. And if they resonate with anybody, I ask you to go ahead and share something as well. C.S. Lewis writes, "We were promised sufferings. They were part of the program. We were even told, 'Blessed are they that mourn.' And I accept it. I've got nothing that I hadn't bargained for. Of course, it is different when the thing happens to oneself, not to others. And in reality, not imagination. No one ever told me that grief felt so like fear. I am not afraid, but that cessation is like being afraid. The same fluttering in the stomach, the same restlessness, the yawning. I keep on swallowing. At other times, it feels like being mildly drunk or concussed. There is a sort of invisible blanket between the world and me. I find it hard to take in what anyone says, or perhaps hard to want to take it in. It is so uninteresting. Yet I want the others to be about me. I dread the moments when the house is empty. If only they would talk to one another and not to me. For in grief, nothing, quote, stays put. One keeps on emerging from a phase. but it always recurs, round and round. Everything repeats. Am I going in circles? Or dare I hope that I am on a spiral? But if a spiral, am I going up or down it? How often will it be for always? How often will the vast emptiness astonish me, like a complete novelty, and make me say, I never realized my loss till this moment? The same leg is cut off, time after time. The death of a beloved, an amputation. A few more quotes. What do people mean when they say, I am not afraid of God because I know he is good? Have they never even been to a dentist? You know, dentists are good too, but it's still pretty painful when you're sitting in their chair. Feelings and feelings and feelings. Let me try thinking instead. Grief gives life a permanently provisional feeling. It doesn't seem worth starting anything. I can't settle down. I yawn, I fidget. I smoke too much. Up till this, I always had too little time. Now there is nothing but time, almost pure time. Empty successiveness. I'll read one more. I see people as they approach me, trying to make up their minds whether they'll say something about it or not. I hate if they do, and if they don't.
Wow.
How about some of those quotes?
Wow.
Pretty raw, huh? I've never lost someone in grief like that. But I've certainly observed people grieving like that. When I went and visited the dialectices, you know, within less than a half hour after Adam died, you know, their sadness just, it fills your own heart. And you sometimes without anticipation. I brought along Father Constantine. This is his first time visiting somebody who had just died, my assistant. And I had him start the prayers. And he got about halfway through the Trisagion prayer and his voice broke, you know, and the emotions just started. And even tonight, after Paraclesis, if anyone had joined us, he went to say a few things about Adam, whom we've only known for a short while, and comparing that to the grief of the Mother of God and what she underwent in watching her son crucified, the swords that pierced her heart. And again, he could hardly get his words out. I think that the number one, it seems to me the number one most important thing to do when we're with people who are grieving is to keep our mouths shut. You know, like he said, I see people trying to make up their minds whether they're going to say something about it or not. Even with the dialecticists, I said too much. You know, there was that sense of my own discomfort in the silence of the moment, in the grief that they were feeling. So it's clearly a ministry of presence. Anybody have anything you're prompted to say? Your thoughts about?
Yeah, Father, this is Danny and Sophia Milenkovic. How are you?
Thank God, Danny. Good.
Good. Hopefully, I am not becoming the masked bandit. But it's the tough hour where we always have to multitask.
Yeah. No worries. Glad you're joining in.
Absolutely. But I'm sitting here with Sophia and my wife, and she just brought up an interesting point to go on the word grief. She mentioned that I haven't lost anyone. She's lost obviously family members before, but no one that was tremendously close with her. And that kind of made me think that obviously when my father passed, of course I went through grief, but I guess it wasn't overwhelming just because of his guidance. And then losing my grandparents on both sides was tough, but they were also lived pretty decent lives. And then my kumavi, a parish priest in Pittsburgh, passed last year, and that was tough. But I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't know if I've really grieved yet, to parallel with what you were saying earlier of with Father Constantine is going through. And I guess what I'm asking is that okay? You know, I've cried, but I kind of moved on, still acknowledging their memory and still having moments to always think and pray for them and visit their grave sites. But I guess me personally, as an individual, I go through the moment, and then a couple days after, kind of back to, I hate to use the word reality or the grind. So I can't relate to that story yet. And there's moments, you know, especially with my father, when I hear a hymn or I see a cardinal or I see a picture, I'll have a nice, beautiful, pure moment. But it doesn't consume me. So just curiosity, if anyone can relate to that or what that means from an Orthodox perspective.
Yeah. I would say that for those who have lost a child, lost a spouse, the grieving is much deeper. It's much more for the most part. What do I mean by for the most part? That the experience can be much more, not just destabilizing, but almost, you know, dysfunctionalizing. You know, people people go through a much deeper sense of a much deeper sense of loss. And like, well, let me just say what Ethan said to me, when we were talking, that even Lindsay, even Adam's, wife, and they have a child together, there's a portion of her life, that still awaits her and is in front of her, and there's a in some ways there's a better opportunity for her to be able to go forward, right? But for Gretchen, right, Adam's mom, the challenge is harder. I buried a 35-year-old, and even did 40 liturgies, actual 40 liturgies at our cemetery chapel, except on Sundays when I needed to be back in the main church, for a family that had lost him suddenly. And he was very, very much like Adam, well loved, had grown up in the parish, one of the main families at Holy Cross. The mother went to the grave every day for an entire year, every day. And it was probably not until that year passed that I really saw her smile again. But at the same time, that grieving and that all that she has gone through, she ministers to people now in amazing ways. And that it's not necessarily something that she thinks about, but I've seen her, when I've brought people to talk with her, speak with just such insight and compassion and understanding, C.S. Lewis says, getting over it so soon, but the words are ambiguous. To say the patient is getting over it after an operation for appendicitis is one thing. After he's had his leg off is quite another. After that operation, either the wounded stump heals or the man dies. If it heals, the fierce, continuous pain will stop. Presently, he'll go back his strength and be able to stump about on his wooden leg. He has, quote, got over it, but he would probably have recurrent pains in the stump all his life, and perhaps pretty bad ones. And he will always be a one-legged man. There will be hardly any moment when he forgets it. Bathing, dressing, sitting down, and getting up again, even lying in bed, will all be different. His whole way of life will be changed. All sorts of pleasures and activities that he once took for granted will have to be simply written off. Duties also. At present, I am learning to get about on crutches. Perhaps I shall presently be given a wooden leg, but I shall never be a biped again. St. Nikolai Velimirovich says that when a mother loses her child, a part of her is buried in the ground. And she goes back to the grave every day because to feel whole, to be where that part of her that she feels in all her being missing, she can still find that part and be in touch. So I share these things for just to sensitize us, and myself first. There's this tendency to want to, even with good theology, right? To want to offer people counsel at an inopportune time. And
Father,
Go ahead, Sophia.
so obviously as a mother, I can't imagine anything more heartbreaking. I'm at a loss for words and losing a child. I literally can't, like, and I'm sure every mother on the call can express my lack of words for what the emotion is. But I have an aunt through marriage who lost 2 children to cancer, one at 12 and one at 40, and 2 sons. And in my head, I've always thought, like, no matter, I hate to say this, but I'm going to be real honest here. No matter what has happened to me, I'm never like suffering in the sense that she is, right? Like, no matter what my suffering is, I look at her and I think to myself, you know, you lost a child to cancer at 12, and then you lost another child to cancer at 40. And then I think to myself, like, I could never say words that would be solace to her, right? I could never bring up Christ to her.
A dad who lost his 19-year-old son, they found him in his bedroom in the morning, in our community at Holy Cross, left the church. He was on the parish council. And every time I tried to talk to him or call him up, he would just say, Father, don't even try. God doesn't exist. You know, or if he does, you know, I don't want to know. I'm just, you know, it was still too painful. C.S. Lewis wrote, C.S. Lewis, not that I am, I think, in much danger of ceasing to believe in God. The real danger is of coming to believe such dreadful things about him. The conclusion I dread is not, so there's no God after all, but, so this is what God's really like? Deceive yourself no longer. We know what that is, right? We know that's temptation. We know that people who suffer and mourn in to this depth will, you know, one day come to see things differently and understand things differently. You know, I met another couple going to a hospital, visiting a woman who was dying, and they were there ministering as well. And she was Orthodox and he wasn't. Neither was his wife, but he was a pastor. But they were friends with the daughter of the woman. And we started talking in the hallway. They lost 2 sons, one day apart. From suicide. And yet, clearly, they had gone through their grief and their mourning, and not that they didn't struggle, not that they didn't feel in some way, you know, like C.S. Lewis was describing, but they had arrived at the other side, and they were going forward in their life and caring for their other children and committing those sons to God, and able to come and minister to others in the hospital still. And I was blown away from them. They were a couple that I wanted to somehow stay in touch with. And I think that we can almost use this as a bridge, right? now to move on to our last topic, the great cloud of witnesses. Saint Philemon would say that the greater the love, the greater the suffering. And there's no greater love. No one who loved more, he said, besides our Lord, than his mother. And therefore her suffering was the greater than any other. And she is the greatest of the saints. And she continues to weep for the sins of the world. And she continues to fulfill a role as an intercessor for the church in the whole world. I'd say that there's no greater source of hope that we find as we look at death than the witness beyond the grave of the saints that we experience in the life of the church. I wanted to start by reading this story from this book, Father Arseny, Priest, Prisoner, and Spiritual Father. And this is the story where Father Arseny becomes very sick. I should have marked it in the book. It's going to take me a little while to find it. And I might just have to tell it from memory. In any event, he had been in a concentration camp for a number of years. Okay, I found it. The title of it is, "O Mother of God, Do Not Abandon Them." This story is based on one Father Arseny himself retold to his closest spiritual children, and the person who recorded it says, "I was one of them." So he had lived in this barracks for a while now, and not only had the Christians grown to love him that were in the prison in Siberia with him, but all the political prisoners and even the criminals that were there. And he had transformed the barracks just by his presence and his great courage at times, standing up to especially the prisoners who were the criminals, the real hardened criminals. The exhausting hot summer with its clouds of mosquitoes had been replaced by a rainy, humid, and cold autumn. The ground was sometimes frozen and sometimes steaming with rivers of melted mud. It was damp and cold in the barracks, which made life particularly difficult. The clothing of the prisoners never could dry out. Their feet were constantly wet and covered with blisters. A flu epidemic began. Every day, 3 to 5 people died. It was now Father Arseny's turn. He could not rise from his bunk. His temperature was 104 degrees Fahrenheit. He had chills. He was coughing. He was congested. His heart refused to function. In the special camp during such epidemics of flu, patients were not even put in the hospital. Only if your skull was cracked or if your leg or arm was cut off or broken were you taken to the hospital. Flu had to be dealt with within the barracks. The rule of the camp was, if you can stand, you work. If you can't stand, then prove you are not faking an illness. If you prove it, they will take care of you if the authorities approve. In the camp, there is a plan as to how much work must be done by each prisoner. If he is made to do more work than expected, the authorities are remunerated. Of course, the prisoner himself did not even know it, but his work brought money to somebody. The authorities exist to keep to their plan, so there is no time for soft-heartedness. When a prisoner is sick or has a high fever, he has to ask permission to go to the infirmary. There they will take his temperature. If it is below 103, he is sent back to work. Should he argue, they will send him to the punishment cell. And on top of it, the supervisor will hit him in the face to remind him of his responsibilities. If the fever is higher than 103, he may stay in the barracks in bed, but he must appear every day in the infirmary. If he becomes unconscious in the barracks, the medic will come to check his temperature and throw some medicine onto his bunk. Then he can stay in bed, but take care he doesn't remain there after his temperature drops below 102. So this was the general rule. If you can walk, walk to work. Don't use the camp doctors. They're usually hired by the government and know their job. It doesn't take much for them to shout, "You're faking, off to work. If you don't, I'll send you to the punishment cell." It is true that many of the prisoners had been doctors before they were arrested, but those were never allowed to practice in camp. They had to do physical work like anyone else, particularly hard work at that. On the third day after Father Arseny became ill, one of the doctors among the prisoners looked him over and called a lung specialist to discuss the case. They called Avsenkov over and told him the patient has pneumonia, complete exhaustion, a serious vitamin deficiency, and his heart is worn out. It looks very bad. We do not think he can last more than 2 days. We would need medication, oxygen care, but under these circumstances, there's nothing we can do. Father Arseny was almost an old man. He had lived in this camp for a number of years, and over that time, many people in barracks had died and been replaced by new ones. Only perhaps 12 people were such veterans as he was. Everybody looked at these old timers with surprise. How and why were these patriarchs still alive? A medic was called in. He looked at Father Arseny from a distance of 2 meters, tossed some aspirin onto his bunk, gave Avsenkov a thermometer to check his temperature, saw that it was 104, and saying he has the flu, he left. Father Arseny grew steadily worse. His friends could see that it was the end, that his time had come. They sent a man to the hospital to try and get help. His friends from among the criminals tried to soften up the supervisors. They managed to obtain some mustard powder for a plaster and some raspberry jam, and they brought him anything they could. A messenger managed to get into the hospital with great difficulty, and with the help of some true friends, he begged for help, for medicine, and explained what was going on with Father Arseny. The doctor listened and asked the messenger, "How old is the Zeke, and how long has he been in this camp?" The messenger answered the patient was 49 years old and had been in the camp for 3 years now. The doctor answered, "Do you think that a special camp is a sanatorium, and the Zeeks in it should live until they are 100 years old? Your patient has beaten the odds. It's time for him to go. He has lived long enough. There is no medicine for him. It is needed for the army." The fever rose higher and higher. Father Arseny lost consciousness more and more often. Avsenkov tried to give him aspirin with raspberry jam to drink. Sazakov put a rag with mustard powder on his chest and back. The doctors among the prisoners helped as much as they could the minute they returned from their labor, but Father Arseny grew worse and worse. At times he was nearly motionless. He was dying. Death is a common occurrence in the camp. Everyone is used to it. But in this case, everyone felt it in a special way. From one end of the barracks to the other, you could hear, "Father Arseny is dying. Pietre Andreevich is dying." For each one of them, he had done something good, something kind. A most unusual man was dying. This was something the politicals as well as the criminals understood. This last sentence in parentheses I added to his memoirs already after Father Arseny's death. Father Arseny prayed on and felt the support and help of his friends. Gradually, he grew silent. "He is going," someone said. Father Arseny felt also that he was dying. The barracks, Zasakov, Asavkov, Alexei, the doctor Boris Petrovich, he could see them no longer. Everything had disappeared, had faded away. After some time, Father Arseny felt his unusual lightness grip him, and heard an absolute silence surrounding him. He grew calm. His difficulty in breathing, the mucus that had blocked his throat, the fever that had been burning his body, his weakness and helplessness all disappeared. He felt healthy and energetic. Now Father Arseny stood by his own bunk, and on it he saw a thin, exhausted, unshaven, almost white-haired man with pinched lips and half-open eyes. Near the man he could see Avsenkov, Sazakov, Alexei, and a few other prisoners whom he, Father Arseny, especially knew and loved. Father Arseny looked attentively at the man on the bunk and suddenly realized with amazement that the man on the bunk was himself. His friends were gathered near his bunk. The enormous barracks with its numerous population, the whole vast camp, Father Arseny was suddenly seeing it all with absolute clarity. He understood that just now he could see not only their physical appearance, but their souls. Through the silence that was in him, he saw the movements of the prisoners, and although he could not hear them, he could somehow understand clearly what they were saying and thinking. With awe, he realized that he could see the state of each of their souls, but he knew that he was no longer with them in this world. An invisible line separated him from this world, and he was unable to cross it. Now Sezikov brought a cup to his lips and tried to pour something into his mouth, but could not. The water spilled over his face. Avsenkov and Alexei were talking about something with a few of the others. Father Arseny stood at the foot of his own body, looking at himself and at the other people as though he were an outsider. And suddenly he understood that his soul had left his body, and he, the priest Arseny, was physically dead. Father Arseny turned around in wonder. The barracks was disappearing into darkness, but somewhere in the distance there was a blinding light. Recollecting himself, Father Arseny started to pray and immediately was at peace. He understood that there was somewhere he had to go. He started walking towards the blinding light, but having made a few steps, he turned back into the barracks and went up to his bunk. Looking at Alexei, Alexander Pavlovich, Ivanov, Sazikov, Avsenkov, and the many others with whom he had shared the thorny path of suffering, he understood that he could not leave these people. He could not leave them. He kneeled and began to pray, begging God not to leave Alexei, Avsenkov, and Alexander, Theodor Sasivkov, and all the others with whom he had lived in this camp. "O Lord, O my Lord, do not leave them. Help them and save them," he prayed. And especially asked for the intercessions of the Mother of God, begging her in her mercy not to abandon the prisoners of this special camp. As he prayed, he cried, begging God, the Mother of God, and all the saints to have mercy on them. But his prayer was wordless, and now the barracks and the entire camp appeared before his spiritual eyes in a very different way. He saw the whole camp with all its prisoners and its prison guards as if from inside. Each person carried within himself a soul which was now distinctly visible to Father Arseny. The souls of some were afire with faith, which kindled the people around them. The souls of others, like Sazikov and Avsenkov, burned with a smaller but ever-growing flame. Others had only small sparks of faith and only needed the arrival of a shepherd to fan those sparks into a real flame. There were also people whose souls were dark and sad, without even the least spark of light. Now looking into the souls of the people which God had allowed him to see, Father Arseny was extremely moved. "Oh Lord, I lived among these people and did not even notice them. How much beauty they carry within them. So many are true ascetics in the faith. Although they are surrounded by such spiritual darkness and unbearable human suffering, they not only save themselves, but give their life and their love to the people around them, helping others by word and by deed. Lord, where was I? I was blinded by pride and mistook my own small deeds for something grand." Father Arseny saw that the light of faith burned not only in the prisoners, but also in some of the guards and administrators who, within the limits of what they could do, performed good deeds. For them, this was extremely difficult because it was very dangerous. What is all this for? Flew through the mind of Father Arseny. What is it all for? He stirred and observed the spiritual world of the people, the same people with whom he had lived, talked, or had only just seen. How surprisingly varied and spiritually beautiful this world appeared before him. People who in the crowd of others had seemed to Father Arseny to be spiritually empty and depersonalized, he now saw anew. He saw that they carried so much faith, so much inexhaustible love for others, did so much good and bore their cross without complaint. And he, Father Arseny, living among them, he, the priest and hieromonk Arseny, had not seen them, had not noticed them, had not connected with them. "Oh Lord, where was I? Pardon me and have mercy on me. I only saw myself. I was deluded. I did not have enough faith in people." Bowing down, Father Arseny prayed for a long time. When he stood up, he saw that he still was in the camp, but he no longer had his new perception of it. The bunks in the barracks had disappeared. Father Arseny stood at the gate of the camp. The sharp beams of the searchlights were sweeping the region, and by the gate stood a sentry. It was night. The camp was asleep. Father Arseny turned towards the camp, blessed it, and prayed for all those still living in it. "Lord, how can I leave them? How will I be without them? Do not leave all those who live here without your mercy. Help them." And kneeling in the snow, he prayed. It was cold. The wind threw clumps of snow, but Father Arseny felt none of it. He prayed for a long time, then stood up and left the camp. He passed the sentries and walked along the road. Somewhere far away, he saw a bright, inviting light and walked towards it. He walked easily and calmly. He passed the forest and the village and suddenly found himself in his own town, the one with his church, his very church, the church where he first served as a new priest, where he, with the help of his many spiritual children, had worked hard to restore its ancient beauty. How can this be, my Lord? Why am I here? He murmured, and entered into the church. The first thing he saw was the familiar icon of the Mother of God, the ancient miracle-working one, whose sorrowful face looked deeply and attentively at each who approached her. Everything in this church was as he had left it, but now it was full of people, even overflowing with people. The faces of the people were joyous, and they looked at the icon of the Mother of God. As Father Arseni walked towards the altar, the people squeezed right and left to leave a passage for him. He walked towards the altar with a light and happy step. Having entered the altar, he wanted to vest himself and begin to remove his camp jacket for the service, but someone who was standing nearby said firmly to him, "Don't take it off. These clothes are also vestments for service." Father Arseni looked at his padded cotton prison jacket. It was shining and blinding white. He put on his priest stole to begin serving, and he was amazed. The altar was flooded with a bright light. The whole church gave out light, and the icons looked quite extraordinary on the walls. They seemed almost alive. There were many praying people. They were praying deeply and joyously. Serving the liturgy, Father Arseni, that together with him served the higher monk Herman, the priest Ambrosi, the deacon Piat, and several more priests. And he, Father Arseni, knew all those who served with him now. At the side of the altar quietly stood Bishops Jonah, Anthony, Boris, his spiritual father and friend, Bishop Theophil, and they all looked at him with joy. Lord, thought Father Arseni, they all died a long time ago, and now they are here. It is so good to be here together. Father Arseni served, and his soul was full of joy. Prayer filled all his being and uplifted him. Blessing the people praying with him, he understood that he knows them all as well. They are his spiritual children, his parishioners, and others he had met in different places, in different camps. He had shared his life with these people. And all these people were praying for someone. They were asking for something. And looking more carefully at them, he realized that just like the priest serving with him and the bishop standing in the altar, all these people had died, some a long time ago and some more recently. Oh, Mother of God, how can this be, thought Father Arseni. He did not wait for an answer, but he entered deeply into the service, into prayer. As he served the liturgy, he felt that he was burning with joy and inner warmth. He received communion, finished the liturgy, and knelt before the icon of the Mother of God of Vladimir, asking her to forgive all his sins. And he prays a prayer where he mentions all those in camp, and he asks her not to forget them, the long suffering. He cried and he sobbed, and tears flowed all over his face. Father Arseni's heart ached and was tight in his chest. How would they survive, all those who were there? Again, he asked the Mother of God not to forget them, whose suffering is beyond what man can bear. And suddenly, he heard a voice, a clear, extremely gentle, but firm, clear voice saying, "The time of your death has not yet come, Arseni. You must serve people some time longer. God is sending you back to help his people. Go and serve. I will not leave you." Father Arseni lifted his head and looked at the icon and saw that the Mother of God seemed to have come down from the icon and stood in its place. He fell on his knees at her feet and could only repeat, "Mother of God, do not leave them, and have mercy on me, the sinner." And again he heard her voice, "Lift up your face, Arseni, look at me and tell me what you want to tell me. Tell me your thoughts." Father Arseni lifted his face, looked at the Mother of God, and overcome by her kindness and her unearthly greatness, bowed low and said, "Mother of God, your will be done, yours and the Lord's. But I am old and ill. Will I be able to serve these people as you, the Sovereign One, want me to?" "You are not alone, Arseni. There are many people serving me. You will serve alongside them, and together with them you will help many. God has just shown you that he has many people helping him. He has shown you the souls of the people who live in the camps. Faith does not live in many of them. Faith does live in many of them, faith and love. You are not alone in the kindness you bestow. Go, serve me. I will help you." And Father Arseni felt the hand of the Mother of God touch his head. Father Arseni arose, took off his priest's stole, bowed to all those gathered, the priests and the people, and saw once again that he knew them all, and that he had accompanied most of them to their eternal rest. His life was in some way tied to each of them. He approached the royal doors, knelt, arose, and asked the congregation gathered not to forget him in their prayers. And he walked to the door of the church. As he was walking by them, the people blessed him. He came out of the church with his soul overflowing with joy. It was easy to walk. He was walking towards the camp, towards his barracks. The forest, the road, the houses all raced by him. He passed the sentries, entered his barracks, walked to his bunk, saw his body on it with the people gathered around it. He lay down on his bunk and heard someone say, "It's all over. He's getting cold. Our father Arsenius died. It's almost 5 o'clock. It will soon be time for reveille. We will have to inform the supervisors." Someone added, "We've all been orphaned. He helped so many of us. I fought against God my whole life, but he showed him to me. He revealed him by my own actions, by his own actions." Father Arseni sighed deeply. It surprised them all, and it frightened many. He kindly said, "I was in my church, and now you see the Mother of God has sent me back to you." And nobody felt that these words were strange, although they were still amazed at his return. Some 2 weeks later, Father Arseni was able to get up. Everything seemed strange to him. Life in general and people all looked different. Each person wanted to help. Each brought him a little bit of his own ration. Even the fair one brought some butter and gave it to Sazakov for Father Arseni. Father Arseni got up, came to life. The terrible illness left him. The Lord and the Mother of God had sent him to serve people and sent him back into the world. If you can't tell, one of my favorite stories of all time. And I just think that that story says so much about how we are not alone, how those who have gone on before still very much are aware and pray for us. And the Lord allows these instances just so that we'll continue to fight the good fight ourselves. You've heard of Saints Raphael, Nicholas, and Irini on the island of Lesbos, the newly appeared martyrs who were martyred in the 1500s but began appearing to people in the 1950s. They appeared to so many people. Thousands of people saw them either living or in their dreams, in visions, while they were asleep. That Photios Kontoglou, the famous iconographer and theologian, wrote a book about it called The Great Sign. And when in the opening of the book, he said that he didn't know of anything like this that had ever happened in the history of the church up to that time. That saints from heaven had appeared to so many people in such a short amount of time, speaking to them while they were alive. In some cases, meeting with them again and again and again and telling them, teaching them how to live the faith, telling them what they had suffered. And everything that they shared was proved by the pickaxe, by the archaeologists who dug down and found. And I'll be visiting with Presbytera, that monastery, in just a couple of weeks on the island of Lesbos. While Photios Kontoglou was writing an icon of the saints, Raphael appeared to him and blessed him and blessed the writing of the book. And there are dozens of books now of the miraculous healings and appearances and help of the newly appeared saints of Lesbos. When Father Gregorius at the monastery of Simonopacha was just finishing his putting to music the poetry of Saint Nectarios in the book that Saint Nectarios wrote of hymns to the Mother of God called the Theotokarion, when he was just finishing those words of that hymn that has become maybe one of the most popular hymns in the whole Orthodox world, Agni Parthene, and translated into just about every language where there are Orthodox Christians and sung in just about every church at some point or another because of its beauty. Saint Nectarios appeared to Father Gregorius. And and smiled at him and let him know he was pleased with the work that he had done. We may never have a saint appear to us. We may never have any of these experiences. But this is one of the reasons why I started the podcast, Signs in Our Times, just so we could hear about these type of things. So we could understand we are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. And like runners in a marathon, we are being watched. We are being cheered on. We're being helped. Most of the time without our even knowing it or realizing it. Saint John of Constantine has this to say about the saints of God. How the creator and provider of all has honored and adored our nature. The saints shine with his light. They are hallowed by his grace, having conquered sin and washed away every sinful impurity of body and spirit. They are glorious with his glory. They are incorruptible through his incorruptibility. Glory to God, who has so honored, enlightened, and exalted our nature. What does the daily invocation of the saints signify, of different ones each day, during the whole year and during our whole life? It signifies that God's saints, as our brethren, but perfect, live and are near us, ever ready to help us by the grace of God. We live together with them, and in the house of our Heavenly Father only in different parts of it. We live in the earthly, they in the heavenly half, but we can converse with them, and they with us. How closely the church in heaven and the church on earth are connected. What love the church has. She unceasingly remembers the church in heaven. She calls upon its members in prayer and gives glory to them for the great deeds wrought upon earth for God's sake. She unceasingly prays for the whole body of the church on earth and intercedes for the departed in the hope of the resurrection unto life eternal and of union with God and the saints. Let us enter into the spirit of this great love of our mother, the Orthodox Church. Let us be penetrated with it. Let us look upon all our brethren as our own members, as we are all members of the one body of the church. And let us love them actively as we love ourselves. Then we shall be living members of the church in heaven, and she will be our active and speedy helper and intercessor. Thoughts, anyone? I have a lot more to read, but I'm doing it again, so I'm gonna just stop for a little bit. Let some conversation percolate up.
Father Theodore, I have one of the volumes of the Miracles of Saint Raphael from the monastery.
Yeah.
My friend had given it to me many years ago. It's just beautiful, the book. I read it many years ago and I have it sitting in my office right now. I have to get it again and bring it home.
Yeah.
But when you mentioned that, that's one of the places that someday, hopefully, I can visit, and the miracles that you read about in the volume are just, they're just incredible, I think. You hope.
I purposely didn't read from what the materials that I sent to you, but I gave you this wonderful article, this wonderful chapter, a word about grief from the Christian Ending to Our Life book. And I the point that I'm trying, I guess, or what I'm hoping to do tonight is somehow to build this bridge between grieving and understanding that what we're going through here is just preparing us for that life to come. And the grieving that we're going through here is probably nothing that prepares us better in some way. As long as we don't despair. And that's the key, you know. And in a way, that's, go ahead. Somebody wanted to say.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Father. Continue your thought. Forgive me. Go ahead.
No, and that's in a way. There's a topic that we left out of this entire talk, and that is the despair that people enter into in this lifetime, that more frequently than ever before, it seems, leads to people choosing to take their own lives and suicide. And but I didn't think we were just going to have enough time to give to it. So after a month off in July, we're going to start up again for the 4 Wednesday nights in August. We're going to discuss our understanding of despair and suicide, kind of historically, the church's manner in which it has tried to minister to people, but also how do I put this? Gave some boundaries to that ministry, and most of all, I think I want to see what we can do as a community to help people that are struggling with the demon of despair, and what we can, you know, when I've talked with my sympatheta, who has Be Nice, a ministry against anti-bullying, but it's mostly suicide prevention ministry. And God willing, she'll be joining us for those talks, or at least some of those talks, and sharing about the program. You know, we kind of, the more we talked about it, I said, you know what, the church is really in the suicide prevention business. That's really what the church is all about, is helping people not to despair in the midst of the insanity that seems to be happening all around us and increasing all around us. But the saints lived through those times as well, and their faith, their willingness to follow Christ and to suffer for their and even give their lives and die for their fellow man, is what has allowed them to share so much in Christ's glory. And he is glorified in them as they continue to serve the church. To this time. So I gave you also this one. This is probably the best thing I ever read on the saints. That's why I added it as well. It's the introduction to the Synexadion, the 6-volume series of the lives of the saints for every day of the year. Someone was going to ask a question.
Well, Father, do you see, or is there a difference from the church's perspective of the time that we live today versus what the saints have experienced in prior times? I mean, I think we all feel like, oh, you know, it's never been this bad, but I think every generation probably said that. So how does the current societal norm, pressure, whatever, play into that with the despair and the getting the message out of what the church says without, by being nice, but without compromising what the church believes in.
Yeah, so be nice doesn't just mean be like a nice person. It's an abbreviation to notice, interrogate. I forget what the C stands for, but it means we have to ultimately be proactive and be willing to not be so nice, for a time, if we're going to really help people that are in the grips of that such deep depression that they're considering suicide, right? So on the one hand, I'm just responding. I'm just saying that, not quite certain if that's what you meant what you were thinking when you said about nicety. I don't think we need to know if things are worse now than before. I think God certainly knows. And there's that wonderful story of the monk, and the hermit with his spiritual charge, that after so many years in the desert, the spiritual charge, just wanting to have a little bit of a word of encouragement, asked his Abba, how are we doing? What do you think? How are we doing in our repentance, in our work here in the desert? And the Abba said to him, well, my child, we're only doing half as well as the fathers before us. So now he became very alarmed. He said, well, if we're only doing half as good as the fathers before us, then how will it be for those after us? And he said, well, they'll only do half as well as we're doing. Now he became extremely alarmed. And he said, well, if that's the case, what will it be like for the Christians in the end time? So this is like the 400s, right? 1600 years ago. And he said, the Christians in the end times, my child, will be able to hold on to the faith. But I tell you that those Christians who do hold on to the faith in the end times will receive a greater crown of glory in heaven than the fathers before our fathers that were raising the dead with their prayers. So we don't need to know. We don't need, and it's maybe not even so helpful to compare ourselves. We live now. We live in this the 21st century. No, 22nd century, right? It's 21st century. I'm sorry. I'm jumping ahead. We live in the 21st century. And what we do need to know is that God is with us, and he has us exactly where he wants us to be, to serve him, to work out our salvation, to be his light. And he's given us all that we need in the church. And then it's just up to us. Someone asked Father Thomas Hopko once, who is professor of dogmatic theology at St. Vladimir's for 25 years, if you could take the whole dogmatic theology of the church and boil it down into one sentence to answer the question, what must someone do to be saved? What would that answer be? And Father Thomas, without hesitation, said, they just have to want it enough. So that is going to be the judgment. What have we done with what the Lord has given us? How have we responded in the circumstance in which we live? And we work out our salvation starting with those in our own family, right? They're our neighbor first. It's not like we're going to do some wondrous things for all these people around us. It's, as one priest in Greece said, I just try to sin a little less every day. And remembering that this life is short, and that one day we're going to be making that journey is probably the the most helpful practice to have, to live the most each day. You know, to get the most out of each day. I shared with you also from this book, When God Is Not There, Metropolitan Nicholas Hatzinikolaou of Mesogea in Lavreotiki. He had 3 doctorates in astrophysics, in medicine, and in theology. He worked for NASA and he worked for Boston Children's Hospital at the same time. And he designed things for the Boston Children's Hospital for their surgical units. But while he was there, he got his degree in theology, from Harvard, his doctorate in theology. And after that, he left America and went back to Greece, and he went to the Holy Mountain, and he lived in the Hesychastirion, in the place of silence with the spiritual children of St. Paisios for 6 months. And then Elder Emilianus tonsured him as a monk, and then ordained him and sent him to the Metokion in Athens, Greece. And there, when he was ordained, he said, I just want people to treat me like the welcome mats outside the church. Just come up to me and kick off all their dirt onto me so that they can enter in. And he started serving liturgy every day and hearing confessions continuously, but only from people who didn't have spiritual fathers. And mostly the neolea, the youth of the church, and especially those that were struggling with addictions. And now he's a metropolitan in one of the biggest areas. He has more people in his see than under his see than almost any other bishop in all of Greece. You can find lots of his talks online and so forth. But in this book, When God Is Not There, he does a wonderful job of getting relating to the people who have that question, why, you know, and are struggling and suffering and not sensing God's presence anywhere near them. So it's a really good chapter, talking about children in cancer and where do angels go. There's some wonderful stories in there, but I'm not going to take the time to read them now. It's almost time for us to finish. It's 8:18, but I want to give everyone a chance to speak. So I'm going to go around, and I want you to share something of what you think made an impression upon you during this study or tonight's talk. I do hope that some of you are open, at least those that are in my parish, to be willing for us to start a bereavement group in August, maybe meet once or twice a month. After the funeral tomorrow, and one other person who's ready to leave us in our community, it'll have been 9 deaths within little more than a month's time. And that means there's 9 families out there, right, that are hurting. And my hope is that you'll help me to gather them together, because they're going to be able to help each other more, perhaps, than anyone else, as they can share their grief and as they can hear. You know, and that's one of the reasons that I've asked Don to join us actually in the talks tonight, because he's gone through some true grief in his life this past year, and I see the grace of God really working in his heart, in his life, his family's life, and thus far he seems open to wanting participate some in the group, help out how we can. But everybody else can join us, we'd appreciate it.
I would say to you that your instinct to read from the C.S. Lewis book was bang on. I listened to an audio version. I've been listening to C.S. Lewis and reading C.S. Lewis since I came to Christ in '95, and he's always been a big influence. But I had never read that book, and I heard it on YouTube on an audio thing during the initial stages of my grief after my wife passed. And it describes very accurately. It's very accurate and very true, as he always was. C.S. Lewis was very gifted. God used him well in that way. As much as I can discern spiritually from what's going on in my own life, I encourage you, because as we said in our private talks, there's just something we can feel the Lord working, at least between us, towards this. My thoughts about tonight were, I didn't want to chime in too much because this isn't the grief group, this is your study group. And the things I was thinking about were probably more relatable to that. I would say to you one thing about ministering to people who have just gone through grief. What I felt was God used me to minister to the people who came, more than both to probably shield me from what I was going through, but also to use me. And he filled me with his spirit to minister to people. So it actually was much less at least at first, when most people are knowing and coming and talking to you about what's happened. But that changes as time goes on. And some of the things you're talking about now are more applicable as things settle down. And we also went through much more. We had a house fire. There's many other things that had gone on with our family. So there's many other considerations, but I did just want to encourage you that it's very, I'm not in a church right now. I may go back to the church we were at. That's a mixture of a lot of reasons, and COVID and other things and all these things. But you have come along at a good time, because I needed somebody to talk to about some of this stuff, and it's been good. So I do encourage you to keep going, and I'll come alongside too, however you need.
Thank you, Don. I feel better about it if I have you by my side, actually. So,
Father, I don't know if you're going in order on your screen, but we have to
go ahead.
chime off.
Yep.
Yeah, just real quick to the gentleman that just spoke. What was your name? Don.
Yeah.
Very inspired by your boldness and your vulnerability. I think that's a beautiful thing. I think God is using you, and I'm sorry for your loss. May her memory be eternal. And hearing what you had to say about not overwhelming the grief night, I think you took an amazing step tonight. And I think this group is very powerful. And if Father Theodore, I'm sure you're communicating with him. My wife and I would love to meet you one day, and definitely share some good talk, just so you know that you are loved, and we are definitely praying for you in your journey right now. And I don't relish you going through that, but there are brighter pastures, and I think you have the right desire, and I think you have the perfect scenario to really help you with some steps there. I just wanted to give you a little shout out right there, Dawn.
Thank you.
Welcome. And
that was Dan.
Don, I was in, oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Nicia.
I was just going to say, Don, I was in Sunday school with Evelyn many years ago. I really liked her so much. She was just awesome and a beautiful person.
Thank you. Yeah,
So I'm very, very sorry for your loss. Yeah, it was.
Thanks.
Let's go to Vlasia.
Okay. there were quite a few things that I learned and have taken to heart, have to contemplate, continue to contemplate. My mother passing in the middle of all this was, it was very, very timely. And Father Constantine, I believe my mother was the first person that he did the, he came to her home with.
You're right. You're right, Blessia. Thank you.
And as you were contrasting, his experience with Ethan and asking about, the circumstances of someone's death and their age and the life they lived. Whereas my mother was 98, lived mostly a very, very happy, healthy. I mean, when she passed, the only medication she was taking were her eye drops for her eyes. And, contrast, as sad as that is for us, we can be comforted in the life that she had. And the contrast to what's happened with Adam. And with Adam, in our family, it brings back, my sister lost her son when he was 31 years old.
Yes, definitely.
And, that will never leave us. It's there with us every holiday. And I'm sure my parents will be also, my mother will be, but it's so different with Stratton. I mean, it's just so different. I mean, I have to think it took my sister, you said somebody took 1 year. I could say I finally saw some joy in my sister's heart, like after 10 years, after 8 years, 5 years, maybe, starting to creep up that she had a little bit of joy. So I think you're right, Father, to lose a child is like nothing ever imaginable. I mean, Stratton was my godson, but I still do know that as challenging it is for me, it's still nothing like what my sister.
Yeah.
So, I mean, so many things are very comforting. Makes me want to learn more. Wants me to be better. Wants me to be better at everything than I am. So.
Well, thank you, Blessia. And I do see you as one of the lights of our community. I know that, lights can always grow stronger, but you are definitely giving off the light of the Lord to others, and we appreciate that. Sula?
I thought this was a wonderful study. I learned so much, Father. My mother died shortly before I got married, and she suffered. She suffered for 8 long years. It was so horrible to watch her waste away. If God wasn't going to heal her, I prayed that God would take her, because it was just horrible to see her in such. I mean, it was just terrible. And it took me a long time to realize that. And I prayed, that she was at peace with the Lord, through her suffering, that she would be home with him. And but it was difficult having small children and not having her around. But at any rate, yes, commemorating the dead on a daily basis is very important. And never to assume that, they're okay. I mean, another priest had told me, is if you pray and you feel great peace with their passing, that's a good sign. But it's good to keep commemorating them and praying. And thank you for, bringing that to our attention and preparing. Also, this life is preparation for the next, and we have to take that seriously. And there's a lot of bumps and grinds, and we just, this is temporary. It's a temporary existence. So the pain and sorrow that goes into this life, there's something good that's going to come out in the next. So if that makes sense.
Thank you, Sula. Jane?
sorry, I have to digest a lot of this study, but it's not morbid for us to be considering our death. It just seems like it's more life affirming. It's more accentuates where and how and why we're supposed to live. I met just this last week someone who has moved to another part of the country whose husband died, a friend of mine, at 42, suddenly dropped dead of a heart attack. And I don't have an answer for this, but I'm contemplating. They have 4 children. The eldest was just top of high school at that point. And this person went through great grief. There was a lot of supportive community, thankfully, for family. But I mean, she was confiding in me about how badly she slid and how much she hurt her children. She felt through that because she was just trying to survive. And her friend said, "You've survived this, but at the expense of your children." She has a relationship with her 2 younger. I won't get too specific, but of the 2 older, they're not really speaking with her, and one is about to get married, and she is up here for, she will be included in that. But there's, just that with younger children, when someone loses a spouse, I don't know exactly what the answer fully is. There was support, there's church, but what we can do to avert the damage and pray and even work again now for the healing of those relationships. I mean, it has not all together to do with our study, but it's very real to me right now because I know it's also a reality when we're kind of dealing at a ministry level of how people are confronting or not confronting. I mean, I think she's pulling out of it now. I think things are all coming together, but sometimes you'll have people caught who are vulnerable, or like that one man who wasn't going to go back to church of your counsel, people who are kind of caught in the scattershot and don't fare well. So I don't know why I felt like I needed to bring that up. I don't have an answer fully, but but everything, I mean, all these parts are just incredible. I'm going to go back over through the readings as I get some time too.
Thank you, Jane. Dawn?
Well, I just thought it was very interesting as far as the church practices, because being a convert, I didn't know a lot of things. And so this really helped me. And also, you're talking about Father Constantine. Well, the former Father Constantine was with me and my family when my husband passed. And he came every day faithfully. In fact, I kind of felt guilty. In fact, I said to him, "You don't really have to come every day," kind of, because I had no idea how sick he was. I just kind of thought he's kind to come and all that, but he's going to get better. And
Father Constantinos Kotrubas.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wonderful young man.
Yeah.
And so, but in hindsight, I realized how wonderful that was. And it really, helped to support us, for quite a while. So, I think that's pretty much what I wanted to say. I mean, I've lost so many friends at my age. This is what happens. And some of my lifelong friends I've lost within the last 2 years. That it's really hard. But there again, you have to hope that we are going to get back to seeing them again. But this idea too of praying to them, well, I do pray for them, but that maybe at some point, we'll hear back, or it's just amazing. And the more you delve into it, the more you learn. So thank you so very much.
Frida?
I'm sorry, I was being distracted. For me, this was extremely valuable. I look back, my first experience with death with someone close with me were my grandmothers, who I knew for my whole life. And I was in my late 20s. So, it was something that in the end, I found peace fairly quickly. They were women of faith, and, you could kind of find comfort with that, that they lived a long life, and they did a lot of the I'll say right things. But then, you know, as I was dating my husband, I remembered he shared with me that he lost his brother at the age, his brother was 26, he was 28. He didn't have a father and he just had his mother. So he was the one in charge of dealing with that tragedy, and it happened quickly. And I can just remember the time he told me, all I could think of in my head was, I just can't even imagine how you went through that. Well, you know, needless to say, we got married, and a year after we got married, I lost my brother. And so I have seen the experience of parents losing their child. I've also seen the experience of losing a sibling versus losing a grandparent, as well as I've lost my mom, so I've lost a parent. And then I've also seen my sister-in-law pass away at the age of 45 with 4 children. But hers was more cancer that, you know, dragged on. Most of the deaths I've experienced have been quick. And just actually last week, my mother-in-law passed away at the age of 92. So when I look at all of this, I guess what was extremely valuable for me is I feel that death, I think the most helpful thing for people is to find a way to not fear death. And I also feel that death connects people, because I have a dear friend who her husband committed suicide. How we became friends was because our sons played lacrosse together, but what really connected us was not only our love of Christ, but also having just a true understanding of the various ways of grief, even though hers was suicide, which, thank the Lord, I have not experienced as a form of death. But I just feel like the word connection just comes to play, not only the connection of friendships on this earth, but the connection of prayer with all those who I have lost and I continue to pray for and hope they're in a good place. And then that hope of connection of reuniting. So that's, I guess, how I would best summarize all of this for me.
Thank you. It's been good to have you with us, and we hope you keep.
Yes. And I would just say thank you. You have a beautiful parish, a lot of very faithful people, and who knows? I am a Pennsylvania person, but from the western side of the state originally, but now I live in Illinois. But I enjoyed hearing a lot of all of your stories, and I have shared much of this, Father Theodore, with some of your fellow brothers in Christ, and they're very interested to learn more about it. So you never know, this may continue over here in Illinois.
Okay, may you be blessed. Sounds good.
Thank you.
So it is almost 8:40. I haven't given everybody a chance to share their thoughts. But I think rather than make certain that everybody says something, I'll just ask for one more person if someone has something that on their hearts that they'd like to share, and then we'll wrap up.
Well, Father, this was a very valuable experience for me. And the one thing that resonated with me, that you said at the beginning, was to just shut up. And in regards to that, I feel that there's a lot that I need to learn. I'd like to be part of grief counseling, but I want to know what to do, what to say, and what not to say. And that's where I feel there's a lot of work, that needs to be done if you want to do this properly. And that's really what this whole course has done for me. It's like there's volumes of books written about this, and I've only read a couple chapters so far, and I feel that there's a lot of work to do. And in regards to that, it seems to me with death, one of the things I read early on is we don't understand and prepare enough for it. And maybe that's where we can avoid despair and shorten grief. I'm not sure if that's appropriate or not, but I think that's what kind of resonates when I've heard these other, parishioners share their experiences. And for that matter, what is appropriate to say to somebody you really don't know, but you do want to acknowledge that they're suffering a loss?
And I think we go into that with an open heart and willing to be affected by it, even if it means feeling some of the pain that they're feeling. And then the Lord does give us words, George. But it's also realizing just our being there, just our caring enough to, like C.S. Lewis said, he said, if they were going to bring up the topic, I was going to be upset, but I got upset if they didn't bring up the topic either. So just being present matters so much.
Okay.
So Angela, I saw you were raising your hand too. So we'll give you the last word tonight, Angela.
Okay, I know I talk a lot, I apologize. I think the takeaway for me was acknowledging the fact that we're all dying at some point. And I think overcoming that fear of death is critical. But I think as the person for myself, I really appreciated going through the steps of what I can do to prepare my burial, my selection, so that at the time that I do pass, my family is not, scrambling to figure out finances and where I'm going and, how do I do the bills or whatever, so that you take away that element from your loved ones, that they don't have to worry about figuring all that out, and instead can dedicate their time and their prayers and their energy in actually grieving for you. I love the fact that, I didn't know that we had the choice of not being embalmed, of having a wake in the church. I think that's a beautiful thing. And, just like we have funeral homes that take care of stuff, the church is, an extension of that educating ourselves about that, I think, is really, really important. And I'm glad to see that we're starting that discussion.
Thank you, Angela. So to Carrie and Marion and Eliane, I'm sorry, we're not going to hear, but if you want to give me feedback, I'm happy to receive it from you. Just send me another email, and may God watch over and bless all of us. The Mother of God, be caring and protecting all those whom we've mentioned tonight, loved ones who have passed and families left, recovering and trying to go forward. But I'm just gonna finish with one more time the hymn for Pentecost, and may God be with all of us. I ask your prayers and for our family this weekend as we go forward to our son Nicholas's wedding on Saturday in just a couple of days, and for everyone's summer, first part of their summer in July. Ask your prayers for Ted and I and Zoe as we travel to Greece and come back in the month of July. Blessed art thou, O Christ our God, who did show forth the fishermen as supremely wise, by sending down upon them the Holy Spirit, and through them didst catch the whole world into thy net. O lover of mankind, glory to thee. Amen.
Amen. Good night, Father.
Good
See you
night.
tomorrow.
Just wanted to say thank you so much.
Thank you,
This was
everybody.
really
Thank
needed.
you so much, everyone. Thanks. Thank you, Father Theodore.
Thank you
This has
all.
been wonderful.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. God bless.
Thank
God be
you.
with you.
Tell everyone.